Unfortunately, not the last nerve agent attack that I documented in Syria. Multiple other nerve agent attacks took place in 2016 and 2017, with a deadly escalation on April 4th, 2017 in Khan Sheikhoun and Idlib Governorate. Human Rights Watch identified 90 people, including 30 children, who local residents and activists said died due to chemical exposure. The medical personnel that we spoke with said that hundreds more were injured. In addition to attacks using nerve agents, we documented the Syrian government's repeated and coordinated use of chlorine in attacks to retake territory, including during the final month of the battle for the city of Aleppo in 2016. Chlorine has many civilian uses, but the Chemical Weapons Convention bans the use of toxic properties of any chemical as a weapon, as in this case. And the Syrian government was not alone in its use of chemical weapons, with evidence suggesting that ISIS was responsible for an attack with mustard gas in 2015. Much of what we know about chemical attacks in Syria is due to the painstaking and relentless work of activists on the ground, many who are affiliated with the Chemical Violations Documentation Center of Syria and the Syria Network for Human Rights. And we are privileged today to have with us both Nidal Shikhani and Fadel Abdul, respectively the executive directors of these organizations, to speak with us about the documentation and advocacy that they have been doing. Mr. Nidal Shikhani is the director of Same Justice and the Chemical Violations Documentation Center of Syria, an independent nonprofit research and documentation group that is based in Brussels and that has been established since October 2012. CVDCS is an organization that documents all incidents and evidence of the use of chemical weapons in Syria, seeking justice for the victims and their families, and striving to consolidate the concepts of justice and equality and citizenship, regardless of religion or ethnicity. Nidal, I'm happy to turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lama, for the presentation. Thank you first, I would like also to thank His Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, and his delegation for the valuable invitation and for the efforts to support the Syrian people in their ongoing pilot for 11 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, many years have passed since the beginning of the war in Syria. The United Nations and the Organization of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons have sent several missions to Syria, most of each ended nearly with the same results. Chemical weapons were used in Syria for the first time, specifically in the city of Khan al-Assad, countryside of Aleppo. And that was in the end of 2012 and also in March 2013. The violations continue repeatedly, nearly for 8 years, and CVDCS has documented about 262 attacks with different mechanisms, which laid 3,423 victims and about 14,000 injuries. From what I see, the Chemical Weapon Convention was written with input from many nations, and this is focused on the action that state parties should and should not do with chemical weapons. But the use of but to use its full title, its prohibition of deployment, production, and stockpiling, and use of chemical weapons and their destruction and its general obligations are clearly laid out in Article 1. When I look to the annexes of the Chemical Weapon Convention, in particular Part 11, it's clear that those who wrote the convention imagined that the possible use of chemical weapon by state party against another, and therefore there are no annexes that cover the use of chemical weapon of a government against its own people. However, we applaud the work of the OPCW since they established the fact-finding mission in 2014, and in going so acknowledged the one factor that is written through the Chemical Weapon Convention, that the use of chemical weapons is prohibited. There is no exceptions to this prohibition. CBDCS was the only body that supported the mandate of the Pakistanis mission from the beginning, and has been referenced in many of its reports, which confirm the use of chemical as a weapon in Syria. As you know, following the work of the Pakistani mission is important. In 2015, the Joint Investigate Mechanism was formed on the request of the Security Council, which issued 4 reports that terminated the Syrian regime used chemical weapons in several accidents, whilst ISIS used chemical weapon into an accident. Let us be clear, the chemical fingerprint for the sarin used in Khan Sheikhoun matched for the sarin used in Al-Tamina, which matched the fingerprint of the sarin that processed by the Syrian regime, and the regime claimed that he handed over all his chemical weapons. The United Security Council decided not to renew the mandate of the Joint Investigate Mechanism. So the OPCW worked to form the investigation and identification team, which took over from the Joint Investigate Mechanism team as one of the most important accountability tools. Let me note again that there is no annexes in the Chemical Weapon Convention which cover the formation and the work of the investigation and identification team. But there is also nothing in the convention that prohibited its formation and function. The OPCW should therefore be proud that they have refused to accept the normalization of the use of chemical weapons, despite the Security Council acceptance. The IIT made similar affirmations as the JIM with respect to the use of chemical weapon in Syria, and investigated the March 2017 attacks on the city of Latamina. At blamed the Syrian regime and also investigate another accident in Sarakir and identified the Tiger forces, which are an important part of the war machine for the Syrian regime, as responsible. The IIT reiterated the composition of the chemical with which Latamina was attacked, matched the composition that was in the subsequently destroyed Syrian chemical arsenal. It's apparent that if the Syrian regime has used chemical weapons since becoming a signatory to the convention in 2013, then it has not made a current declaration to the OPCW. Gaps, inconsistencies, and discrepancies remains unresolved, and the OPCW has itself stated that the declaration submitted by the Syrian Arabic Republic still cannot be considered accurate and completed in accordance with the convention and resolution number 2118 by the United Nations Security Council at the year 2013. There are clear violations of the conventions and Security Council resolution 2118 and 2235. CBDCS has collected thousands of pieces of evidence which prove that the Syrian chemical weapon program is still operating and that the Syrian regime does not want to cooperate with the mission tasked with destroying this program. The program which caused the death of injury of thousands of civilians is still in danger. It's even still a danger for the Syrian and the neighboring countries, as well to the border international security. We may now be a day, weeks, or months away from the release of new reports concerning other accidents, all the same results, and here we cannot remain silent. Since the Syrian regime is not a member of the International Criminal Courts and the Security Council is paralyzed. Let's look to the OPCW Convention. There were no FFM or IIT mentioned at the Chemical Weapon Convention. We have now both. The OPCW has built the plot in place of accountability. Only one level now remains, and that is judicial level. I challenge the state parties to think even more outside of the box. I'm not a naive, and I know that I know what I'm asking is outside anything ever. It's just to protect even the convention of the OPCW. I know that there will be aspects that currently appear to impossible, but the OPCW has a track record of doing what is necessary to investigate the responsibility for the use of chemical weapons in Syria. All that I'm asking is the circle be closed by establishing a special tribunal with legislative jurisdiction to ensure that the convention is not breached and hold those involved accountable. At the end, I just wanted to remind everyone that the chemical weapons sneak into the dreams of the Syrians and turn it into death. Many people talking about Syrians, but not with them. And so thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you, Nidal, for your comments, and in particular for raising the point around the role of state parties and the need for accountability. And I'm sure this is something that we will touch on further in the question and answer. But first, I would like to go to Mr. Fadel Abdul. Fadel is the Executive Director of the Syrian Network for Human Rights, SNHR. And SNHR is an independent human rights organization that monitors and documents human rights violations in Syria. It mobilizes efforts to limit these violations and contributes to the protection of victims' rights, exposing perpetrators of violations to hold them accountable, and raising awareness among Syrians of their civil and political rights. SNHR has monitored and documented human rights violations in Syria since 2011 and has established databases to archive and catalog these incidents, including cases of use of prohibited weapons, such as chemical weapons. So I turn it to you, Abdul.
Thank you very much, Lama. And I want to thank the U.S. Permanent Mission of the OPCW for including the Syrian Network for Human Rights in this essential event. I would like to discuss four main points. We at SNHR worked intensively on documenting incidents of the use of chemical weapons in Syria. And we have paid special attention to them because they are weapons of mass destruction. And because the Syrian regime use of chemical weapons is the first use of after the Chemical Weapons Convention. This file is of personal interest to me, and it was the focus of my master's thesis in international law. The Syrian regime didn't start using chemical weapons in August 2013. We documented 33 attacks using chemical weapons before August 21st, 2013. This is the famous attack on Tughouta. But actually, it was the size of massive attack and the number of casualties that drew the attention of the international community. This is the exact same neglect occurred before Khan Sheikhoun attack in April 2017. The Syrian regime perpetrated many attacks using chemical weapons, but these attacks didn't attract the attention of the international community until the massive Khan Sheikhoun attack. Under the threat, back to 2013, under threat and pressure, the Syrian regime ratified the Chemical Weapons Convention, which is followed by the Security Council Resolution 2018 that issued in September 2013. This would have been considered a good achievement if the Syrian regime has stopped using chemical weapons against the Syrian people. But in international and local reports shows that this wasn't the case. on June 2014, the director of OPCW announced that all chemical weapons had been shipped from Syria. This date is essential reference point. On August 7, 2015, the UN Security Council issued Resolution 2235, according to establish the UN OPCW Joint Investigation Mechanism, JIM, which mandate allowed to determine the responsibility of the perpetrator of chemical weapons attack. And until February 2017, this mechanism investigated 9 attacks and determined the responsibility of 5 of them, 3 by the Syrian regime and 2 by ISIS. It's noteworthy that the 3 attacks that mechanism attribute the responsibility of the Syrian regime were in 2014 and 2015 in Hama and Idlib, which means that the Syrian regime has deceived the OPCW and manipulated the surrender of its chemical stockpile by mid-2014. On January 4th, 2016, the OPCW announced that the last item of the Syrian chemical weapons, 75 cylinders of hydrogen fluoride, have been destroyed. On April 4th, 2017, the Syrian regime launched an attack using chemical weapons on the city of Khan Sheikhoun in Idlib suburb. The Commission of Inquiry, the Independent International Commission of Inquiry, the COI, documented the Syrian regime responsibility for this attack, and the OPCW confirmed the use of chemical weapons in the city without specifying the perpetrator. The UN and OPCW, this is the JIM mechanism, proved the responsibility of the Syrian regime for Khan Sheikhoun attack. In November 2017, Russia actually vetoed the extension to punish the JIM and vetoed to end the extension of the joint investigation mechanism and used 2 vetoes within 24 hours. On April 7th, 2018, the Syrian regime launched an attack using chemical weapons on the city of Douma in eastern Ghouta in Damascus suburb governorate. The Commission of Inquiry documented the Syrian regime responsibility for this attack, and the OPCW proved the use of chemical weapons in the city without specifying the responsibility. Here we don't have any as we know that the JIM being expired. But on Wednesday, June 2018, the OPCW issued a resolution expanded the mandate of the OPCW and established the investigation and identification team, the IIT. I think that this is my theory, that the privilege of this establishment actually returned to the Syrian victims. Let's move to the first 2 reports issued by the IIT, which is hold the Syrian regime responsibility for 4 chemical attacks. 3 in the first report issued in April 2020, namely Al-Latamna, suburb of Hama, on March 24th, 25th, and 30th, 2017. And the report states that bombing containing sarin gas were dropped from air in these attacks, and concluded that the Syrian regime helicopter dropped a chlorine cylinder on Al-Latamna. The second report, issued on April 12, 2021, determined the responsibility of the Syrian regime on Saraqab attack, February 4th, 2014. What I want to say is that if we go back to January 4th, 2016, we find that the OPCW has announced that the last item of the Syrian chemical weapons had been destroyed. The Al-Latamna attack occurred 14 months after this date, followed by Khan Sheikhoun chemical attacks only a few days later, providing new evidence of the extent and misinformation and deception practiced by the Syrian regime Russia, on the international community, and the OPCW. It was followed by Saraqib attack 2 years later. Let me present quickly the SNHR work on documentation, because as a local organization, we like following and monitoring more incidents than the UN and the OPCW. SNHR documented 222 chemical attacks, 217 by the Syrian regime, and 5 attacks by ISIS. And we distribute those based on year, and but what is more important, distribute those based on the Security Council resolution. So 33 attacks before the 2218 resolution. And the vast majorities of the chemical weapons attack took place after the regime ratified the Chemical Weapons Convention. And that's why we have this frustration from any types of accountability against the Syrian regime. The second point, quickly also, what is like, I believe that the Syrian human rights organization specialized on documenting violation of chemical weapons, UN organization, the OPCW, the international organizations such as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, have professionally and effectively succeeded in improving the Syrian regime use of chemical weapons. And the Syrian regime and Russia have tried to discredit all incidents to create a state of chaos. But I think that a fair researcher can easily reach the truth, because the methodology followed by the organization I referred to earlier is strict. And I think that the Russia and the Syrian regime can describe can just describe what they are thinking without any proof, and can actually deceive just some of their lawyers, nothing from their loyalists, nothing more. As for the difficulties that we face, there are many. Perhaps the most prominent of which is the protection of the witnesses. This matter needs the support of states that accept the protection of the survivors, witnesses, and their families. Many witnesses actually have paid heavy prices for their information, and many of them have become forcibly displaced inside and outside Syria. The third point, what need actually to retain the potential evidence, actually. I think that we have, in SNHR, we provided and we support the mandate of the OPCW. We provided information, and we are main source in the IIT report, and we will continue to do that. What is needed, actually, I still have this concern about the witnesses. We need to keep maintain the relation between us and those witnesses, because sometimes we are losing this contact due to multiple displacement. So that I refer to the witnesses protection. I think that we need to keep preserving the information, photos and videos with high standard of electronic protection. We have been exposed to many cyber attacks that originated from Russia. The final point is what we can do. This is the most practical point. First, the perpetration of attacks in chemical weapons were used. Actually, it's a complex process. So the Syrian regime is it's a highly centralized regime, and thus it cannot be carried out without approval and acknowledgement of Bashar al-Assad. Therefore, the decision is central, and it's well-studied policy of the Syrian regime in which both army security institutions were involved. The leadership of General Military Intelligence Division, the leader of Air Forces Intelligence Division, the National Security Office, as well as Center for Scientific Study and Research. mainly Institute 1000 and Branch 450. Our database included the involvement of 387 of most prominent military officers, security services personnel, and civil military personnel. All of them must be included in the US-European sanction list. Second, Russia must be held responsibility for the Syrian regime use chemical weapons because it's ended the mandate of the Gym mechanism and also threatened the witnesses and survival of Syrian regime Duma attacks in April 2015. Third, all attempts to restore relation with the regime accused, or I can't say more than accused. We have evidence is more than accusation, but we use this term of using chemical weapons of mass destruction must be condemned. Fourth, the Syrians cannot accept that a regime that uses weapons of mass destruction against them continue to rule. Therefore, the international community has a responsibility to achieve a political transition that guarantees a change in leadership of many of this army, of many of the leadership in army security forces that are implicated in use of chemical weapons. The fifth recommendation, that the UN Security Council has failed actually to maintain any international peace and security, and the Syrian regime has repeatedly violated all of the Security Council resolution. So the Security Council totally failed in Syria, and this is like a major issue, using of mass destruction, as well as we noticed a similar failure in Ukraine because of Russia veto. I think it's necessary now to think about establishment civilized humanitarian allies according with a clear criteria aimed to provide urgent protection of civilians from brutal regime in the event of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Finally, we need to keep supporting the effort of documenting violation and providing evidence to the UN investigation mechanism and OPCW, and using them in trial based on universal jurisdiction. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Fadel, and thank you, Nidal, for your compelling presentations. We will now move to the question and answer portion of the event. The participants are able to submit their questions via the Slido link, which is in the chat. And I will begin by asking a question to both of the panelists. So to Fadel and to Nidal, my question is about the legacy of chemical weapons attacks in Syria in light of the impunity for these attacks. What is the legacy of these attacks on the level of the individual victims who were harmed, on the level of security and stability in the country, and on the level of the prohibition against the use of chemical weapons? How do you think that the absence of accountability for these attacks has impacted on these three levels, on the individual, on the statewide, and on the global prohibition? Nidal, if I can ask you to begin.
Well, just get back to the right of the victims. It's one of the main subjects. Is something very important, even for us as in NGOs. We wanted even to protect the convention as Syrians, but at the same time we face every day questions from different families about their rights. We are being followed with witnesses since 2014 or maybe 2013. Some of them who provide the testimony for the fact-finding mission, even for other missions who's working on accountability, but still they feel that there is nothing happen. We believe that is not going to be in 1 day or 3 days. That's take long time because there is big process. We started fact-finding mission, then we go to GEM, and then now we work with the IIT, and then the IIT should deliver this kind of documents to the IIIM to the international and impartial and independent mechanism who's working on a legal side, just to prepare the cases and try to deliver it to prosecutors. The big problem is that we have a very huge case in Syria. We were talking just now about 262 use of chemical weapon in Syria, but how much we were able to document it, how much the fact-finding mission were able to reach those locations. There were different locations that the FFM were not able to go to there, and from this point of view, we follow only what the fact-finding mission confirmed, and then it goes to the IIT, and then to Sidelines. The luck here is there is no tribunal, there is no court that can manage all this kind of cases, and we try to follow small nation courts who's specialized with international cases like that. Even those small courts have limits of those cases. That's why I was saying in my speech, it's really important for us. Is the work of the OPCW is very important. It's the most important work, because they were working on creating accountability tools. The fact-finding mission is accountability tools. The IIT, the GIM, the DAT, the Declaration and Assessment Team, who's following all the stocks and try to find the production and start to look at the story in Syria. The case is really complicated, but still we have accountability tools, and that's what we are very looking for the OPCW or at the other hand, just to find a way to establish a tribunal that can guarantee to follow the main sources who gave the Syrian regime the main product, the people who's working at those activities like the SSRC and others. They've been trying even to hire Syrian with different nationalities to create fake companies out of Syria to buy the main product just to support their activities, which is out of control. We've been located minimum 3 companies just in 2019 who still supporting the Syrian regime, even from Russia, from Moscow. So it looks like the situation is a bit complicated. From our side and the bodies, international body that we work with, we protect the information of the witnesses as much as we can. We protect even the documents that we gave to the international bodies. We try to also get more information that can help at the court side, at the tribunal side. But still, we need the efforts from the state parties. We need really more steps. Freezing the membership of the Syrian regime is a good step, but it's not enough. It doesn't give justice for convention. It doesn't give justice for Syrian families. Till this moment, we still receive many requests. We still receive many questions. And we hope one day we can find a hole to go through tribunal and throw all this case out. It's very important for everyone.
Thank you, Nidal. Fadel, would you like to add to the same question?
Yeah, thank you for this direct question. And the simple answer is that the victim is totally frustrated, actually, and hopeless. That's what my presentation talking about. I think we are facing total failure in all levels after solid documentation. After, as I mentioned, this tremendous efforts from the UN mechanism, different missions, 3 missions, OPCW, Human Rights Watch, local Syrian organization. So we have enough evidence and documentation, but the international community didn't build on. And that's what has increased the suffer of the victims. They told us, we know that the regime is criminal, the Iranian as well, the Russian, but how about the West? Why they didn't react? What happened with the red line? What's happened with this? This is the only use of chemical weapons in all around the world. It's worth that those victims who's being killed, which is for their family to have justice, and who's being injured as well. And they are still waiting for how many years, and they are like losing hope. The responsibility actually not only on the UN Security Council, as I mentioned, it's failed. So what is next? Actually, here we are talking about committing war crimes and keep violating the UN Security Council resolution. I think further steps need to be taken in this regard, especially that we are talking about mass destruction weapons. We are not talking about this minor violation, and that will encourage others. Now we are hearing, so Putin is also threatening using nuclear weapons. Actually, and I wrote about, we talk about this standard and what is the failure in Syria to deter the Putin and Russia. Actually, encourage him to repeat the crimes in Ukraine. But what the West actually react much better than what is reacted in Syria. There is zero sanction against Russia, for example, against what they committed in Syria. And I think all the steps taken by the West in Ukraine is a fair and it should be taken in Syria. So this is the victims levels, and this is the same. The organization, like the Syrian organization, is almost consists of victims. Actually, we are all victims. We have one chemical weapons survival in our team, and so almost our team being displaced because of the use of chemical weapons. Thousands being displaced due to the fear. So this actually continues impunity. None of the high-rank Syrian officers being held accountable, and none of them will be based on the universal jurisdiction. Human Rights Watch wrote about that. We wrote about that, the limitation of universal jurisdiction. What the international community tried to do, okay, we have those trials, but those are not enough, actually. We know how's the limit of those. Finally, I think fight crimes against humanity and war crimes, especially the use of such mass destruction weapons, is not only the Syrian responsibility. We need help, we need support based on Geneva Convention. This is the responsibility for all states, actually, to actually assure their responsibility in fighting those. So I think further steps need to be taken against the Syrian regime and his allies in order to achieve at least the minimum bar of accountability, which is still not yet being done, so that we have this level of total frustration and some actually of the victims even losing hope or start not cooperated with UN documentation mechanism holding them the responsibility, what they did to us or holding us, because they don't recognize between what we can do or what we cannot do. Why this didn't brought justice for us? This is the main question we are facing.
Thank you, Fadel. And I think we all all of us that worked on documenting human rights violations in the context of the war in Syria looked with horror at the situation in Ukraine and seeing the repetition of the kinds of abuse that is happening in Ukraine and the risk of further abuse and lack of respect for longstanding international norms. But there's a second question to you from one of the participants, asking if you could describe some of the methods that you've used to document attacks and to identify perpetrators of chemical attacks. Could you speak to that, please?
Yeah, sure. Actually, documenting the chemical attacks is very complicated, and of course, the methodology is different from attacks to the others. But what we have in our mind, for example, if the question asking, do we have same level of documentation of the IIT? No, we don't have. They have laboratory, which is like some states have such laboratory. But we, what is like we able to document? We documented the photos. What we have actually, how's the injured being reaction after those attacks. We are seeing photos and videos. Also, we talk to hospitals, those victims being moved to. Also, so this is a combined evidence we try to gather together in order to say that we have this level, that chemical incident being happened here. We have the name of casualties, and we try to talk to doctors who's able to like assure to us that there is chemical gas being used, because those actually dead without any blood. So there is a reason, there is a outcome report from mainly the doctors and from aid worker as well. So all of those analysis, the shape of the weapons itself, what is included. Sometimes we are able to collect some symptoms, sometimes we are not. And even if we collect, we need to analyze those, which is out of our hand. I'm talking about our methodology, not the OPCW, which is they have, and they analyze those sharpness or symptoms. So based on all of those, we are saying that chemical weapons being happened here at this time. That's very briefly.
Thank you, Fadel. And Nidal, a second question for you, related to accountability efforts. What role do you see that the OPCW can play, or that member states can play, in supporting evidence preservation, in supporting witness protection, and in supporting the efforts of civil society organizations who are documenting chemical attacks and supporting the victims? Nidal, can you hear us? Nidal? Were you able to hear the question, Nidal? You're having trouble? Okay. I think Nidal is having trouble with his connection.
I hear you now. I hear you now.
I'll go ahead and repeat the question, Nidal. I'm asking if you could speak to what role you think OPCW or member states could play in evidence preservation, in witness protection, and in supporting the work of civil society organizations that are documenting chemical attacks and responding to the needs of victims.
Well, I think the OPCW should work very seriously of keeping protecting the mandate of the fact-finding mission, because the fact-finding mission is the main tools to follow if the chemical being used as a weapon. If there is a chemical weapon in Syria, the fact-finding mission is the most important base, and also to keep supporting the identification and investigation team, because their mandate even to check the people who's responsible by getting more evidence and even support the state parties with all the results they found. Regarding to the question, it's better maybe if they can think about establishing tribunal. Establishing tribunal, we will end the problem. We have all the facts of the use of chemical as a weapon. We have the fact of who gave the order. We already supported the IIT and the GIM with many strong evidence. We've been followed even the record of the pilot. when from which airport they start, from where they get the weapon, who gives the order, how many kilometers they were far from the stock. I mean, we got very valuable information, and that was supported with their mandate. I believe the fact-finding mission and the RIT are the most important, even DAT are the most important tool for the accountability, but it's still missing. We don't have tribunal. If the state parties can work, since they start to do the fact-finding mission and the RIT, which means they can work even on establishing a tribunal to end the problem. Otherwise, we're going to stay like that. Each year, we're going to face the same report, same results. Nothing will end. It's really very important even to focus on giving the weight for DAT. DAT were locked for many months. They've been access to Syria. They have different questions. There's many operating and many sources to support the RIT, and then at the end, they have no way to go to Syria. Supporting the DAT is also very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nidal. And Fadel, going to you for a final question. Fadel, you've talked about the manner in which you document individual attacks and the painstaking detail that you compile in order to have a strong evidence base for culpability of the attacks. I wonder if we could zoom out a little bit and talk about the patterns of attacks. And this is a question from one of the participants. If you can speak to whether you have identified a clear pattern regarding who has used chemical weapons in Syria and under what circumstances those weapons have been used.
Yeah, that's a detailed question, but it's a very vital one. Because I think that he's referring to what we mentioned in some of those incidents, some of those attacks. Let me clarify something actually. The chemical attacks which we documented, it's killed 1,409 civilians, or civilians and armed about 1,500. Out of from civilians, 227,000 what we documented. So comparing, it's a large number, but comparing to the total, to the tool, or to the total figures, it's a small number. So the aim of using of chemical attacks is terrifying the society and leading them to surrender. That's the main point. Because when we talk to survivors and victims and they explain to us their feeling, actually they are more terrifying from if barrel bombs being dropped. Because here, as I mentioned, they are seeing children or women or whoever killed without blood. And it takes time, some of those like victims to be being killed. So this is a terrifying weapons. This is the regime strategy. Some of those attacks being used actually in order to seize a military advance. Of course, I can't distribute all of those attacks based on location, based on governorates, based on years. That's a very detailed one. But in general, this is the regime strategy actually of using those chemical attacks. But let me be back again of what is the regime also strategy. The regime used minor chemical attacks, testing the reaction from the international community. 33 attacks took place before August 2013. The reaction was almost zero, just to threaten. That encouraged the regime to implement the Al-Ghouta attack. Same things happened after, starting 2014, the regime used the chemical weapons 63 times. There is also, the reaction was very poor until Khan Sheikhoun. After Khan Sheikhoun, the regime also used the chemical weapons again. The reaction also was so poor until Duma. So the international community, the condemnation took place only in 3 major chemical weapons attacks. That encouraged the regime to use and to repeated use. The regime strategy, and to be honest with you, Lama, and to the question as well, the regime get benefit. The Duma being surrendered, he seized Duma. He succeeded to seize Duma due to failure to deter the regime. Yeah, if the question is asking, did the regime get benefit from killing Syrian, use this mass destruction? Yeah, he did. Did the regime succeed in seizing the power and keep as a dictatorship? Yeah, he succeeded. Because thousands being displaced, and he seized many lands and territory due to use of the chemical attacks.
Thank you, Fadel, and thank you, Nidal, for these very compelling presentations. I think your presentations have done a good job of establishing the political dynamics that led to these attacks, the human suffering that resulted from them, and the legacy or impact of a lack of accountability for these incidents. You've also pointed to the important role that the OPCW has played and can continue to play in advancing efforts for accountability for Syrian victims and ensuring that the prohibition against chemical weapons continues to be respected. I want to thank the panelists for your presentations. Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you to the participants for joining us. You will receive, after the close of the event, a link with the recording of the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day. Take care.
Bye. Thanks, Lama, for moderating.